Greetings, everyone. Um, so I'm going to go to work soon, actually, but well, uh, today I'll be reviewing "It Wasn't About Slavery: Exposing the Great Lie of the Civil War" by Samuel Mitchum. Um, and where to begin? It was kind of a short audiobook. It was 6 hours and a little bit more. Um, what can I say? Um, Before it goes into the details of the war, it explains how slavery was pretty dominant in New England and in New York. Um, the the slave trade, how it went about the slave trade, how Spanish as well as British merchants were involved in the slave trade for well over 100 years before the the, the Declaration of Independence in 1776. People like to bring up like it was like last year the 1619 project, in which apparently in 1619 the first slaves had from Africa had come to North America, and this for like the people who I think it's Nicole Hannah Jones. She is she's some rabid left wing ideologue who wrote in the New York Times the 1619 project, and I think she recently got tenure at University of North Carolina. But yeah, and she's saying that the white people have not been, you know, consistent when they have not upheld the value that all men are created equal, but blacks have always. But this book doesn't really address that, and I'd say the more important event in 1619, the, what would be um, the the government established at in Jamestown in Virginia. This is when this is at first when the colonies have home rule, you could say, where they rule themselves rather than being ruled by Parliament in London. Now let's get into it wasn't about slavery. So the slave trade in the 17th century and the 18th century was was a really profitable industry, and there were many factors involved. I mean, yes, there were Southern slave owners, but the invention of the cotton gin in 1793 was by Eli Whitney, um, was the one that really increased the demand for slaves in the South. Um, but there are other factors, not just the South. Like it's like the South is the only sinner in the slave when it comes to slavery. Um, what about there were Africans who were enslaving other Africans and then selling them on the west coast of Africa, and as well as Muslims, some from North Africa, some from some Arabs who also enslaved Africans, and they were sold to Englishmen and Spanish people, Spaniards, um, they, and how do I say this? Massachusetts and Rhode Island became really big into the slave trade. It was really, yes, South Carolina was also involved, but Massachusetts was so big apparently that Great Britain was erroneously thought of by some to be the to be a subsection of Massachusetts. Like it was, New England was really big into the slave trade, and the United States Constitution in 17, which was which was ratified by 9 states in 1788, protected the slave trade until 1807. In 1807, then I'm referring to Article 1, Section 9, like the importation of such persons. It doesn't actually use the word slave because by not using the word slave, you can include indentured servants, which included white people, like Benjamin Franklin. As in, I guess the difference between an indentured servant and a slave is that the slave is there indefinitely, while it has to work indefinitely for the master, whereas the indentured servant had a fixed time, but oftentimes the deadline would be extended, and some of them would die being indentured servants. But they did the same work essentially. Some indentured servants were from Ireland, but the slave trade was considered was considered even more immoral than slavery. And I believe George Mason, the father of the Virginia Bill of Rights, and a very one of the three men who at the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia to reject to refuse to sign the Constitution. He was I think critical of the slave trade. And obviously the book by Mitchum talked about how the North started to become more and more manufacturing, have a more of a manufacturing economy, because while the South remained agricultural, because the North used to be a lot more commercial, and that's why it had threatened secession during the embargo of 1807 signed by Thomas Jefferson, as well as the War of 1812, and they considered secession in the Hartford Convention towards the end of the War of 1812. So this is around 1814, 1815. And what else can I say? It brings up the irony of that the New Englanders' ancestors were profited heavily from the slave trade, from slavery, and now you have abolitionists in New England condemning Southern slavery, like as if they forgot that their ancestors were involved in slavery themselves. But getting on to the question, what's in people's heads when they read, it wasn't about slavery. People ask, so then what was it about? Referring to the Civil War, or perhaps secession. I mean, secession, and the reason for secession is obviously different from the reason for the war. But we'll get into that. The primary reason is money. And slavery is a part of this money question. But to say that it is just about slavery and nothing else, well, that's being short-sighted. That's not. You have to look at other factors. See, the from the very beginning, the the southern states, so that's Georgia, North and South Carolina, and Virginia, they were paying the majority of the taxes. Remember that? Okay, so out of the 13 states, so those four, they're in the minority, right? But they've been paying the majority of the taxes. The majority of the taxes being the tariff, because there's no income tax, right? And so this is how it was in the very beginning. And actually, that's the very first tariff. I don't remember when it was signed, but George Washington unfortunately signed it, and there you have it. But in 1792, Alexander Hamilton's protective tariff failed, so it never got to. I don't think it got to George Washington's desk. You would see the protectionism, the rise after the War of 1816. I mean, the War of 1812. So you would have the tariff of 1816. This is as James Madison was leaving the White House, I guess, because Monroe would become the new president in 1816. But the tariff of 1816 was the one that really opened the Pandora's box to protectionism. And unfortunately, Calhoun and Thomas Jefferson from back in Monticello, he's retired by now. They both support the tariff of 1816, protectionism. Well, Calhoun he's a member of the House of Representatives at this time, and he wants to throw the North a bone. Interestingly enough, Daniel Webster is still a free trader at this time, and he's against the tariff of 1816. Calhoun and other Southerners were in favor of the tariff because they didn't want the North to secede. This was a Unionist move. Calhoun was always a Unionist, right? Until the day he died. I guess I should discuss the tariff of abominations, but afterwards, after John Randolph of Roanoke was against the tariff of the tariff of 1816, and he said that the only thing that the tariff of 1828 manufactured was the presidency of Andrew Jackson, because before you got to the 1828 tariff, you would have the 1824 tariff, which was actually signed by President James Monroe. And we'll get to Monroe when I talk about the Compromise of 1820. But the tariff of 1824 was a protectionist tariff. There was actually a tariff of 1820, and Monroe had said that he would sign it, but it didn't. It lost by one vote in the Senate. The only thing that Monroe vetoed was this internal improvements bill in 1822. It was for a road. I don't remember the name of the road, but 1824 he signs the tariff of 1824, which John Randolph of Roanoke was also against. John Randolph of Roanoke was a free trader, and he's quoted a couple of times in the book. It wasn't about slavery by Mitchum. Now, obviously after you can't talk about the tariff of abominations without talking about the the nullification crisis, and he actually brings up something. He actually Mitchum brings up how um, in 1822 South Carolina actually did nullify um, so, something. It was about it was South Carolina had brought up had introduced a law that would enslave blacks or capture and enslave free blacks that would go onto the shores because South Carolina was a was was a trading city. Well, Charleston, South Carolina, was a trading port, and but free blacks would often encourage like the enslaved blacks in South Carolina to maybe have a slave revolt, or that's what they were afraid of. So, um, a federal judge who was a member of the Supreme Court at the time, but he was also running circuit. He said that this law was unconstitutional, but South Carolina nullified his action, and James Monroe did not enforce the judge's act. So this wasn't even the first time that South Carolina had nullified. When I'm referring to the tariff of 1832, because when Andrew Jackson gets in, well, he actually used the tariff of abominations money to pay down the debt to zero, and afterwards he signed in a tariff of 1832, which did significantly reduce the tariff, but not enough. So the South Carolina legislature called for a convention, a nullification convention, and they voted to nullify the tariff of abominations as well as the tariff of 1832, and South Carolina was, well, I'll say this, like historians say that they were basically standing alone, but after John C. Calhoun had resigned the vice presidency, he was already a lame duck because Martin Van Buren had already been elected vice president. Calhoun had resigned to join the United States Senate, and John Randolph of Roanoke, as well as future President John Tyler, had both assured him that Virginia would have come to South Carolina's aid if South Carolina, if Andrew Jackson would actually use military force against South Carolina to enforce the tariff. Because other states actually didn't really like the tariff of abominations. It was just South Carolina was the one who stood up. But it goes later on into how, other tariff history about how South Carolina only stays in the Union because Henry Clay and Calhoun come up with the compromise tariff of 1833. Now, 1842, John Tyler reluctantly signs the Black Tariff of 1842, and then Polk signs in 1846 the Walker Tariff, named after his Secretary of the Treasury, Robert J. Walker, I think. And then, 1857, Franklin Pierce signs the Tariff of 1857, which lowers the tariff so that it's the lowest it's ever been. And this is the height of, I guess, free trade, from 1846 to 1861. This is the height of the free trade in the United States. But then the tariff of 1860 gets the Morrill Tariff gets passed and signed by James Buchanan 2 days before, and this more than doubles the tariff. And it passes because the 7 states, including South Carolina, the first 7 states that would form the Confederate States of America, had already left the Congress. So the the Southern senator who was blocking it in committee, blocking the moral tariff in committee, could not keep blocking it, and yeah, it would pass and would be signed by Buchanan 2 days before Lincoln took office. Like, even if Buchanan would veto it, but he wouldn't veto it because he's from Pennsylvania, steel steel manufacturing state, which loved protective tariffs. Um, Lincoln would have just signed. Lincoln would have signed another tariff increase because Lincoln campaigned on like pander. He for the Republican nomination he pandered to the the delegates at from Pennsylvania, which was the second largest state, well, as in the second largest had the second largest number of delegates at the Republican convention. He pandered to them, saying, "I'm old Henry Clay tariff Whig." Listen, he's for tariffs as well as internal improvements and the central bank, just like Henry Clay was. Henry Clay's American system. And remember, as I said before, the tariff was the main source of revenue. And the South paid over 80% of the revenue. So actually, moderate Republicans, though those who weren't abolitionists who wanted to end slavery wherever it was, at the same time. Moderate Republicans like Abraham Lincoln actually didn't want. Yeah, they actually weren't lying when they said in 1860 and 1861 that they would not touch slavery in the states that it already exists, because the slavery was very profitable in the South, and if the South didn't make money, they wouldn't be paying taxes to fund the internal improvements in the North. So speaking of the Republican Party, and I'll go back to the Republican Party because I've talked about the tariff issue and how they were the North has been plundering the South since George Washington was president, unfortunately, but the spirit of protectionism really started opening up in 1816. Now, and there was also a carriage tax. The carriage tax only passed the House of Representatives because of the 3/5 compromise, because Northerners actually wanted slaves to count as zero, or slaves and also indentured servants, because the Constitution doesn't use the word slave. But the southern states wanted slaves and I guess indentured servants, those people, to count as a full person because they wanted representation in. So it was about political power, and that and economics, and there were a disproportionate number of carriages in the South. So yeah, the North was able to pass a carriage tax. It only passed the House of Representatives because of the 3/5 compromise. Because if slaves counted towards full person, there's no way that it would pass, because Virginia was the biggest state population wise as well as territorially, area wise, and I guess some South Carolina also had a lot of slaves, so they would have even more power in the House of Representatives when George Washington was president. There would be no, and yeah, the carriage tax would not pass the House of Representatives. But obviously the southern states are a minority in the Senate. Now let's talk about the slave issue, because the slavery issue was really the territories. and you would see the start of this in 1820. The chief opposition to the Compromise of 1820, the Missouri Compromise, which would allow Missouri to come into the Union, but on a condition that slavery would be banned above Missouri's southern border, except for Missouri itself. And obviously, the main objection to this was the Fifth Amendment. Cannot deprive property without due process of law. And the territories also belong to everyone. Like I think I've explained this in The Rise and Fall of the Confederate Government by Jefferson Davis. But and I said Charles Pinckney, who was in the Philadelphia Convention. He said if we believed, like we the delegates of the Philadelphia Convention believed that slavery could be regulated by the Congress, the central government, then there's no union. And how do I say this? And John Tyler and John Randolph of Roanoke were opposed to the Compromise of 1820. Now, you would see, I guess, this reignition with the Wilmot Proviso, named after Democrat and later Republican from Pennsylvania, Representative David Wilmot. And David Wilmot has a very famous speech online about how he favors the white man over the black man. He has no sympathy for the Negro. He wants the territories to be for white people. So see, the Northerners and Southerners were fighting over the territories. The Northerners didn't want whites to compete with blacks for jobs in the territories, while the Southerners, they wanted political power. But the Mitchum says that this was trying to have slavery, like an agricultural society, in those Western territories. The climate wasn't good. It was a futile cause. They should have surrendered. They should have tried to secede all the way in 1850, or when Calhoun was alive or something. Because the Wilmot Proviso was considered the Wilmot Proviso was saying that all the territory that claimed from Mexico in the Mexican-American War would be free of slavery. So what does that mean? And many Democrats, but not including Calhoun, actually supported the war. It was actually the Whigs who were against the war, or at least the Southern Whigs. And the Southern Democrats who supported the war, they realized they felt betrayed and duped, I guess, because the territories belonged to all the people of the states, right? The states own that land. If it's federal territory, right? The states created the federal government, so therefore they own the federal government as well as its territories. Now, we get to 1850, and he had Zachary Taylor, who is president, and there is this bill, the Compromise of 1850, that how do I say this? This is I'm talking so much of not even the war itself or secession. It's fine. Zachary Taylor was a little bit skeptical of the Compromise of 1850. This was about bringing California into the Union, but some people wanted to and many Southerners voted Whig because of Taylor, because he was a slave owner, a Southern slave owner like himself. But Taylor actually supported the New Mexico Constitution, which was anti-slavery, and then some Southerners felt like betrayed that he would do such a thing. Does he not care about the political struggle? But they were really becoming increasingly becoming a minority. The southern states. And actually, Zachary Taylor had threatened some delegates from Texas with hanging because the Texan delegates threatened secession. I don't remember exactly what this was about, but and there was also the Nashville Convention called by Mississippi in 1849, which took place in 1850 in Nashville, Tennessee, about discussing about whether or not to secede, which was just funny because just a few years ago from then, people like John Quincy Adams were threatening secession. Like Northerners were threatening secession over tariffs. Over Texas entering the Union, and Zachary Taylor was actually skeptical of some things in the Compromise of 1850, but he dies, and Stephen A. Douglas makes the different parts of the Compromise of 1850 into five separate bills, and Millard Fillmore signs all of them, and which included a strong fugitive slave law, and by this time Massachusetts and the other states were nullifying the fugitive slave clause in the Constitution. They started doing it in around 1842, and oh man, like this is I'm talking. If I explain the compromise of the 1854 and 1857, like 1854 Kansas Nebraska Act and 1857 Dred Scott decision. It's gonna take forever before I even get to the war. But I'll say what I learned. The Southerners in Pierce's cabinet, because Pierce had succeeded Fillmore in 1853. Southerners included Secretary of War Jefferson Davis and the Secretary of Navy. I don't remember his name. They said they urged Davis to sign the Kansas Nebraska Act, and they urged Pierce to sign the Kansas Nebraska Act because they believed it would help. But Mitchum actually makes a claim that the South should have seceded before they got to this point, because even if they took Kansas as a slave state, Minnesota and Oregon were going to become free states. So they were already. It was too little, too late. Like even if they were able to successfully have Kansas without any wars or whatever, this is too late. They should have seceded before then. And I don't know what Franklin Pierce could have done at this point. Like I think I've said this before. Like Southerners has said that they wouldn't support him in the convention if he didn't sign it, and he was skeptical because this would repeal the Missouri Compromise. But because the Kansas Nebraska Act enshrined popular sovereignty, as in each like the territories would decide rather than the Congress on the slavery question. And this was, I think, Jefferson Davis's mistake, because that they should have. I don't know. He was even before the 1860 election, like Davis was skeptical of secession, but I don't know. They were getting desperate I think they should have just left back when Calhoun was alive. Calhoun, known to talk about the tyranny of the majority in his disquisition on government. And it would become eventually a tyranny of the majority. And now, 1857, Justice Roger Taney writes in the Dred Scott decision that black people can't be citizens of the United States, and slavery that cannot be regulated by either the territories or the Congress. Only states can regulate slavery. And Stephen Douglas, he saves his Senate seat in 1858 by clinging on to popular sovereignty, even though he made an enemy of the North by doing that, because by taking this centrist ground, right? In 1860 and trying to have the Democratic nomination, like it wasn't going to work. But it actually pointed out how the former governor of Georgia was his running mate, and Douglas actually died a few months into the war in 1861. If they had all just rallied around Douglas, and then his vice president from Georgia would become the president, there would actually be no thing, but there would be no secession, no war, and so much of this would have. But who in hindsight which Southerner would say, I'm going to support the guy who's still clinging on to the popular sovereignty, even though Supreme Court ruled something even better for us, that only the states can do it, can control slavery. How would you even have the foresight to know that? The Southern Democrats chose Vice President John Breckinridge as the guy, as the nominee. And Breckinridge was, in 1856, he was supporting Pierce, but then when it became clear that Pierce wouldn't win, he switched his support to Douglas, and he was put in as the vice president. But he became the running mate, and how do I say this? And he was an ally of Douglas, and they didn't even get along. Breckinridge didn't even get along with Buchanan. So there's some unfortunate things that happened, and now they were running against each other. As well as there's a constitutional union party that just didn't want to talk about slavery, which was led by John Bell of Tennessee. And in 1860, right? And they just didn't want to talk about slavery, and Miller Fillmore backed them. So, but they only got like 3 states. It was the reason why Lincoln wins with only 39% of the popular vote is because Douglas and Breckinridge split the vote. That's it. So that's how. And Douglas believed that if he had told Jefferson Davis wanted them to all step down. Bell, Breckinridge, and Douglas, they all stepped down, and then an anti-Republican presidential candidate would emerge, uniting all 3 of them, like the John Bell, which would be the former Southern Whigs, and they would fight against, as well as the Democrats. They would all fight against the sectionalist mostly northern Whig party. There were some, Democrats like I mentioned, David Wilmot, and his Abraham Lincoln's first vice president, Hannibal Hamlin, former Democrat. I think he was also a former free soiler, as in free soiler, kind of like David Wilmot, who wanted to ban slavery in the territories for white people, so that white people don't have to compete with them for jobs. It also talked about the New York's. Okay, so let's fast forward into the war, how we got the war. So the first 7 states secede, right? And what I learned was that Virginia was fine in the Union, and Virginia more than doubled the population of the Confederate States when it left. So it was, you could say that Lincoln was trying to have it both ways, trying to keep the Union together, in, as well as have the southern states not secede, like the southern border states not secede. Well, he had his way with Maryland because he imprisoned the the mayor of Baltimore City Council, and some state and federal politicians from Baltimore who were said to have not been pro-union. And yeah, there was the Second Amendment was infringed. They took the guns, so they Maryland couldn't really join the Confederate States even if they wanted to. But that was important because Washington D.C. was wedged between Maryland and Virginia. So I guess you could say Lincoln's mistake was the tariff. I mean, was enticing Virginia to leave by calling for 75,000 troops because he wanted to make sure that they would fire the first shot. At Fort Sumter, and then I guess also Fort Pickens. Like, there's so many details I realize, but he had said to one Unionist Virginian who was discussing with him, he said, like during this time, like around the Fort Sumter firing the first shot, like that what about my tariff, like because there's no way that South Carolina and the rest would join with that tariff, and Lincoln needed the tariff or else the federal government's going to be bankrupt, and you wouldn't have protectionism for the northern states. But alas, it wasn't about slavery, and in 1861 nobody believed almost none of the Northerners believed that it was about slavery. It was about preserving the Union for the Northerners, and for the Southerners, only 67% of enlistees own slaves. Bruh, I'm sorry, I'm getting kind of tired. What else can I say? It talked about the 3 reasons why Jefferson Davis could have survived with the Confederacy, like have the Confederacy survive diplomatically, politically, and militarily. Militarily would have been winning the Battle of Vicksburg or the Battle of Gettysburg. Politically would have been I don't know, George McClellan winning the Democrats, the Democratic election. I mean, the election of 1864, he ran under the Democrats, but he lost, maybe partly, I guess, due to voter fraud, and diplomatically, try to forge an alliance with Great Britain and France before the Emancipation Proclamation. See, actually, the Emancipation Proclamation was written by Lincoln in hopes that there would be to incite slave revolts, and that it didn't happen, but it did give, I guess, in the eyes of the Europeans, the moral high ground to the Union, because Great Britain, and Queen Victoria, they would not support the Confederacy in an alliance, and and France would only join the alliance if Great Britain was in it. And France being under Napoleon III. So what's the last thing I can say? I'm sorry, this is getting long. This is getting longer than I thought it would be. So I guess he should have tried to do it before the Emancipation Proclamation, and he was expecting that Davis was expecting that the British would just help them, because the British were relying on cotton, but they just bought more cotton from Egypt, the British, with the naval blockade. Once there was a naval blockade by the Union. So, because I think at the beginning they were trading with the British, and actually Great Britain was kind of afraid, of them of the Union after the war, that they might retaliate, and Great Britain and France never officially recognized the Confederacy. Queen Victoria recognized belligerence between the North and the Southern states, but not really recognizing the Confederacy as a separate republic. I remember one thing I read about was that Benjamin Disraeli was truly neutral in the conflict, but but his rival, William Gladstone, was more of a sympathizer. He tried to say that, like, if you had asked him straight up, do you sympathize with the Confederacy? He would say no. But he did make a speech saying that Jefferson Davis had created a nation. And I guess he was kind of pressuring the Palmerston government in the cabinet to recognize Great Britain, not to recognize the Confederacy, but it didn't happen. And it talked a little bit about Lord John Russell there as well. Look, there's so much I could talk about, man. I mean, I think you've heard this already. Like, if now, let's bring in the Canadian viewpoint. I've talked about how Lord Acton had wrote to Robert E. Lee after the war that he saw in the principle of states' rights the only way to check the central government, and that was destroyed when the Confederates lost the war. And states' rights was considered like a reason, like by the Canadian founders, to be a reason why it wasn't good. Why the war happened in the first place. I mean, it was about money, right? As Samuel W. Mitchum would say, it was about money. It was about political power and economy. Who would tax the other out of existence? Like, I mean, would the North tax the South out of existence? And that's what it was about. And that's why moderate Republicans, actually, like Abraham Lincoln, they recognize this, that yeah, we're really not gonna end slavery in the South because the South is making money from slavery, and the South is giving taxation money to benefit the North. And one more thing, I guess I can say, William Lloyd Garrison, he was anti-slavery. He didn't want a union with slaveholders. He was a secessionist at the beginning, but then he was called out for being a hypocrite when he supported the war against the South. So, to modern, like I talked about, its influence on how the British North America Act was drafted in the Constitutional Convention, like in Charlottetown in 1867. And yeah, I guess I've already mentioned the Wild Rose Independence Party in Alberta. It's kind of the same thing. um, they're being taxed, and equalization money is sent to Quebec and the Atlantic provinces. So this is, I really see the parallel in this, and like maybe I don't want to sound like cocky or anything, but how come no one's mentioning this like in the media? The North, in until 1860, the North 1861, the North was plundering the South using the tariff, which is a tax. So how is it that Alberta and Saskatchewan, they're being plundered, I guess, by the central government, and then the central government gives the money to to the eastern provinces, and it's like people don't see. I don't know why. Am I the only one who sees this parallel? It's not a north south divide. It's more of like east west divide, except the British coasters, the British Columbia coast, Pacific coasters. I guess they're leftists, while as the inlanders, the people in the mountain region, like people like from Jay Hills. Uh, Jay Hill is another leader of the Maverick Party, and he was a former Reform MP from like 1993 to, I don't know, 2015 something. He served as the House leader, conservative House leader, when Stephen Harper was Prime Minister. Stephen Harper also being a Westerner, but I guess I'll say this about Stephen Harper: like he was an economist, so yeah, he did believe, a conservative economist, so he did believe in free markets. And I mean, I disliked. I can tell you some other reasons why I dislike him, but Maxime Bernier brought up how they could have changed the equalization formula to make it less generous. Um, while they're in cabinet, like, because Bernier was in cabinet, and he said that it was easy to change the equalization formula. All you had to do is have one cabinet decision, and you would you'd be able to change the equalization formula to make it less generous. And this is, I guess, Stephen Harper being, even if he's an Albertan, I guess he didn't put. I guess he wasn't a sectionalist. I guess he tried to be prime minister for all of Canada, which, is, it's not something negative to say. Um, Recently, Jason Kenney had, the referendum. I could talk about, how the senators, the prime minister appoints, how Alberta is the only one who elects the people of Alberta elect their senators. Like, I can talk about how I actually don't really like that, and how this is mirroring the United States post the 17th Amendment, because before the 17th Amendment, it was the state legislatures who sent the senators there, and this was a very important check. This was a core part of federalism. This is the check. The Senate is the key, because it stops. It has the power to stop stuff from the House of Representatives, as well as block appointments from the president. So it was the state's check on the federal government. So, so how I feel about senators being elected is it okay? I mean, I could just go on and on about it. How, like, I'm not too big of a fan of that. Um, but they had a more important issue, was the equalization referendum, which passed, which would say no to equalization, and like, as in, it would cancel equal. They were asking, the referendum asked Albertans, do they agree with equalization, and then they said no. But I remember Jean Chrétien said, "Good luck. You can," and also Maxime Bernier. They both, I've seen them both say, "Good luck. Try to, we're trying to change the constitution, because you need 7 out of the 10 provinces to agree to this, as well as, and then 7 of those, making up like the majority of the provinces, right? And that, I guess that would have to be Ontario and Quebec, because Ontario and Quebec combined are the majority, so you need both of them essentially, or Quebec's not gonna agree to that. There's one more thing to say. Jean Chrétien Jean Chrétien, for those who don't know, is the former Liberal Prime Minister of Canada from 1993 to 2003, and he talked about, yeah, if you're a mayor, I was watching an interview with Evan Solomon from CTV. He said, if you're a mayor, who do you blame? The provinces. If you're the province, who do you blame? The federal government. If you're the federal government, who are you gonna blame? The Americans. So at some point you need to stop passing the buck, and I don't know, like, it's a discussion for another time, I guess. But thanks for watching this review. With I feel like maybe I got a little bit off topic, talking about off the topic of, it wasn't about slavery, but this was Canadian Meets the South, I think episode 9 or 10. I'm sorry, I don't know the episode. But if you've been keeping up with me, thank you for watching. I'll continue to post my thoughts. Like, this is for me to help express myself. Like, I'm not really a good speaker, public speaker, I'd say. So thanks for listening, everyone. Bye now.